Okay, so first we're gonna start out with trying to look at the cut list, and through our cut list we're gonna measure out the top plate and the bottom plate. In this case, 1/16 scale of a 16 foot is gonna be 1 foot, so you know that's gonna be just like last week's assignment. We're gonna measure our top plate and our bottom plate. So let's go ahead and start with bottom plate. Line up perfectly at the edge of this ruler, and then from there you're gonna go ahead and draw a little line at the end to mark where the 1 foot is at. Once you get that, what you're gonna do is use the fence. This is called the fence. Line up against the bottom of this fence. So you can see the little line up perfectly, so the piece of wood is laying on the fence. Once you have that, you can draw a straight line against the ruler itself. Now you have yourself a 1 footer. You can do this with the top plate as well. So you can take another piece of stick, piece of wood, line it up perfectly on top. Make sure it's nice and even to the edge of this. Once you have that lined up, do the same thing. Lay it against the fence. Get it perfectly straight. Check the ends on this side to make sure it's straight. Now you can transfer that same line over to the next piece of wood. Now you know you have your bottom plate and top plate. What I like to do is put an X on the waist side, which means the side that I want to cut. This will give me a sense of where my blade will be. So my shears, I will lay my shears against that area. Let me turn it around for you to see. Notice the blade is against the line. The blade is on the side where the X is at, and you can now clip it. Same thing on the opposite for the top plate. Now you have yourself the top plate and bottom plate. Now that we have the bottom plate and top plate, the next thing is going to go ahead and cut our studs. So we have to determine how many studs. Using your cut list, you should have already figured this out. In our case, our studs are 8 feet long, and 8 feet 16 scale is going to be 6 inches. So same concept as last week's assignment. Line it perfectly straight to the edge of the 0. Go to 6 inches, make a little line. Put an X on the side you don't want. Now you can translate that same thing over the same way you would have done your other studs. So go ahead and line it perfectly straight onto the fence and draw your line straight against the ruler itself. You would do the same thing, translate that same thing over to the next stud and make as many studs as possible. Mark as many as possible so you can cut this off. So let's go ahead and put an X on the side you don't want. Put the shears blade against the right side where the X is at. That way you are able to go ahead and cut it off perfectly straight. And same thing again. Another technique that you can do too, if you want to do this, which is simply use one constant. So you can put this stud across, and what you can do is take one stud, lay it against the next one, and use that as your guide to know how far the next cut is going to be. Now you have your little marking. You get yourself the combination square, lay your piece of wood against the fence, get it perfectly against the ruler, draw that straight line. That straight line will help guide you in figuring out exactly where to cut. So now you can go ahead and cut this real quick. I'm gonna do one more stud for example purpose. Go ahead and line this perfectly straight again and cut this off like that. Same concept, lay it against there. Make it nice and straight against the fence and against the ruler. Draw a line so you know where it's at. And now you go ahead and cut on the waist side. gonna go ahead and do the bottom jack stud as we already did the math a second ago. We know the jack stud is 2 feet in actual size, and 2 feet in translation of 16 scale is gonna be 1.5 inch. So if we go ahead and take a look at this, here's 1 inch right there. 1.5 is right here because 2 inches right there, so 1.5 is gonna be right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and mark my 1.5, make a little tiny mark. There it is. Now I'm gonna go ahead and take the combination square and draw myself a straight line where I've drawn that little mark. Make sure you go ahead and lay your piece of wood perfectly to the fence, enabling you to draw a straight line. Now you have a straight line. Take your shear, cut it off on the waist side, and you can go ahead and take this measurement and do the same. And we have figured that we're gonna have 2 jack stud, bottom jack stud, and then 3 cripple stud on the bottom. So therefore we're gonna have 5 of these same measurements. So same concept, make a little line, translate this over, and go ahead and give it a cut. And the more precise you do it, the more accurate your measurement will be. And when you model it, there is a perfectly straight model instead of having gaps in between. Same concept. I'm gonna cut 5 of these for the bottom 2 jack stud and 3 cripple stud. So I need 5 total. Okay, so now we have cut the 2 jack stud, 3 cripple stud on the bottom. We can go ahead and do the seal now. You know the seal is going to be 4 feet wide in real life, which is, when we did the math, it's gonna be 3 inches. So we can go ahead and line this up perfectly. And we're gonna need 3 of these because what is happening is the seal itself is 1, but the header has 2 on top. So you're gonna have 3 of the same measurements. So what we wanna do is cut 3 of the same thing. So here's your seal. So the seal is just 1 piece. And then we're gonna need 2 pieces for the header of the same measurement. The important thing is you are using your cut list so you know how many pieces you need. And once you know how many pieces you need, cut all the pieces first before actually start modeling. I'll get 1 more piece. Okay, so now I have myself the seal and 2 header. So this is gonna be your header here. Okay, so now we have the header, we have the seal. We're gonna need the center jack stud to support the header. And you know in real life it's gonna be 4 feet. So 4 feet in translation of 16 scale is going to be 3 inches. Same, so we're gonna go ahead and measure 3 inches first. Make a mark, and we only need 2 of these. Same concept, lay against the fence, draw your line on the ruler, on the straight edge, cut on the waist side. Take that again and lay it perfectly. And this one is pretty close. But what we wanna do is make sure it's perfect. So I'm gonna go ahead and trim it off just a hair. There you go. So now you're gonna have essentially your seal, 2 jack stud, 2 header, 2 pieces of header laid on top like that. And then the last piece we're gonna need is going to be your jack stud on top, and then you're gonna need 3 cripple. We're gonna do that last. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna go ahead and lay our measurements perfectly where we need to on your bottom plate and your top plate. To do so, we're gonna go ahead and lay out our plan. So the first thing we're gonna do is, you know that one of these pieces of wood is a 2x4, and translation, the thickness of this is 1/8. So if we go ahead and just get very close to this, you can see is 1/8 is 2 lines, right? So 2/16 is the same thing as 1/8. So you're gonna have go ahead and draw a little line there, line up perfectly, draw a straight line across on the bottom plate. I like to put an X in the center, so that's where we're gonna put the glue, and that's where our stud will be. As you know already, we're gonna need 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 studs before we get to the king stud. So you know that each one of these will be 16 inches on center. Is get to the center of the middle stud, and then we're gonna go ahead and draw a little line on every 1 inch. What I like to do now is just go ahead and start the beginning and draw 1 at every inch. So we're gonna have first stud, second, third, fourth, and fifth. And this right here is gonna be the last stud, and then your king stud will happen right here. We're gonna have the king stud here. Okay, now that we have the king stud right here, we know that the opening for our window is going to be 4 feet. So we're gonna have to do the math on what that translation is. Let's review. We have a stud, our stud, our stud, our stud, our stud, our king stud, our jack stud, our jack stud, our king stud, our stud, our stud, our stud, and then a stud. To find where our cripple stud is going to be, we're going to divide the opening. So our opening is where the seal and the seal going to end. So start and end. That's going to be 3 inches. We're going to find the center of that. So 3 inches divided by 2 is 1.5. So 1.5 inch. Then from there, we're going to move over 1 inch on both sides to get our other cripple stud, to get the 16 inch on center. So go ahead and find the center. We know that it's from the end here and then to the end here is 3 inches. So we're gonna find our 1.5. Our 1.5 is right there. Then we're gonna draw 1/16 over on each side to get our center of our first cripple stud. Let's draw that line first so we don't get confused. All right, we got our first center cripple stud. Then from there, we're gonna draw over 1 inch from the center to the next center, which is 1 inch over, and then 1 inch over on the opposite side as well. That will give us our last 2 cripple stud. So we're gonna draw a little 1/16, 1/16, 1/16 over to the right, 1/16 to the left. We can go ahead and draw those lines up as well, so we know exactly where our things are at. Okay, so now we actually have every little measurement we need in order to complete this assignment. What we're gonna do now, before we actually start, is to get our top plate laid against perfectly to the bottom plate and translate all these measurements upward. To do so, lay against there and draw your lines. What we model, we have the bottom plate and we have the top plate, which is the same. But what we also want to do is find our seal and translate our measurement into our seal. So what I would do is I'll put the seal where it's going to be. So you know the seal is going to sit right where our jack stud is at, between two jack stud. And what we're going to do is going to translate all these lines over to our seal. So that way when we actually glue it, we have all the exact measurement for it. So I'm going to go ahead and just transfer those over right now. Little line. Tiny little lines over. Once you have that, you can now take the combination square, have your lines lined up. Once we have the lines lined up, you can go ahead and line against the combination square and simply just draw those lines for using the combination square and the fence, draw your straight line across, so you know exactly where your jack stud is going to be, where your cripple stud is going to be, and so forth. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that here. Okay, so now I have my seal perfectly measured correspondence with the bottom of the bottom plate. The other thing you want to note is we're gonna go ahead and translate this same measurement, which is going to be our header, and we're gonna transfer all those lines not to the face of this, but to the top of this. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna glue the two header, so we're gonna have two header, glue them together to get essentially a 4x4. So this become a 4x4 instead of 2x4 and 2x4. So we're gonna go ahead and glue this together first. Put a tiny little dab of glue in between the two. That way we can sandwich this together perfectly straight. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna translate those same measurements to the top of this instead of the face of this. So I'm gonna go ahead and translate this measurement over. So same concept. This will help you figure out where the top cripple stud will be. Okay, so now we have ourselves the measurement. Take the combination square, same concept. Lay it perfectly straight. Draw your lines in so you know where they're gonna be when you glue it. We don't wanna expedite, we don't wanna rush any of this process. We're gonna build a strong foundation first in order for you to be able to have a perfect model. All right. So now that we have that, we're ready to start modeling. So, really important to note that when you translate all the lines over, to know that these lines need to be perfectly the same. For example, if you turn this around, the top plate around, this will not align anymore, meaning all your measurements are off. Making sure that each one of these lines are basically the same angle as where it's going to be. So we're gonna go ahead and start gluing this together. First thing first, when you turn in your glue, just be very conscious that this is going to get really hot. So do not touch the metal plate on top. And then when you have your glue, what you want to do is get a sheet of paper, squirt just a little bit out. So if it comes out like that, that means it's hot enough. That means you're ready to go. I'm gonna go ahead and start my first stud by dapping a tiny bit of glue right in the center where my X is at. So I'm gonna put a little glue right there. Put down my glue gun, get myself my stud, and lay it perfectly straight, making sure that it's going to be perpendicular to the edge of that. Hold it for about 10 seconds or so until it's completely dry. You can blow on it if you like to. It will actually speed up the process. I'm gonna go ahead and blow on this. So give it a few seconds to dry. Once it dry, you can actually let go and you should have your first stud. You will do the same until you get to the king stud and then to the jack stud. And then we'll go ahead and move forward with that now to put the next glue. Just a tiny bit. Lay it perfectly straight. Again, if you want to blow on it, it will expedite, it will actually make the process a little quicker. Until it's completely dry, you can let go. Notice how if you touch it, it can be a little bit wet. Just be conscious that these are really hot glue. Hold it in place again. What you can also do is you can lay a sheet of paper on the ground, hold it for a second, and then lay it flat so that way you know that it's gonna be perfectly straight. So once it's ready to go, get on to the next one, and I'll continue through. So we have our studs, we have our king stud. The next piece is going to be our jack stud, and the jack stud is going to be right next to our king stud. Right there, it's going to lay right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put a glue. So you have multiple ways of doing this. You can put a little dab on the bottom, and then we can put a little dab on the side as well. That way, when we sandwich this together, it will essentially stay perfectly where we want it to be. Then what you're gonna have to do then is we're gonna do the same thing for the rest of the cripple studs. So cripple stud, cripple stud, cripple stud, jack stud, and then we're gonna have another king stud on the outside. So it's gonna lay next to it. So we're gonna go ahead and we have essentially our jack stud and also our cripple stud in place. What we're gonna do is gonna put one more king stud onto the side of this. So I'm gonna go ahead and put two pieces of glue, one on the bottom and a little bit on top. That will allow me to essentially sandwich this together and make it perfectly straight. So once I have that, remember what we did before. We got our windowsill and all the different little measurements in there already. What I like to do is just make sure I dry fit it. Dry fitting is essentially just put it on there to see if it fit perfectly, and it does. Notice how right now my cripple stud is not perfectly aligned with where all the measurement is at. So what I like to do is just put one piece of glue, starting from the left to right, just like our modeling with our stud. I'm gonna do the exact same thing. I'm gonna put a dab of glue to the bottom of the seal and glue it to that one. Let it sit and dry for a second. And what I like to do is turn this upside down now. So when I glue that in, I notice that that's where my next cripple stud is going to be. So I'm gonna let that dry for a second. And then I'm going to put a little piece of glue onto that section where my cripple stud is going to be. And then move my cripple stud to where that glue is at. That will help me determine whether or not it's straight or not. So I'm going to hold that in this case just because it's kind of a little crooked right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and start blowing to expedite the process. Should take about 10 seconds or so to dry. Once you have that, same concept, flip it upside down. You know where the glue is going to be. Put our glue into that section, right in between the two lines that we drawn. And then move your cripple stud over so that can be perfectly to the center of that. And I'm going to just hold it and press it down just like that. Once it's dry, you can move on to the next one. And move it over. And then we should just have one more. And we should be good to go. I'm gonna go ahead and do the last one. Put a little bit of glue at the edge of this and sandwich it together. If you have excess glue, like you accidentally put too much glue, what you can do is take a piece of paper or a cardboard, and while it's still hot, don't use your finger. You can just go ahead and just take some of that off. And now you have yourself the bottom portion done. Now that we have the bottom done, we can go ahead and put in our middle jack stud on the two sides. We have two more pieces here. Simple, just go ahead and put two pieces of glue and about right there. essentially going to sandwich that in. Once you have that sandwich in, don't do what I do. It's going to get really hot. I'm just used to my finger getting callous and not as hot as for me, but don't do that. Don't do what I just did. Do the same thing on the opposite side. Put a little piece of glue on the two end. We're gonna go ahead and sandwich the last piece. Just like that. Again, if you have excess glue like this, you can take a piece of paper or cardboard, go ahead and wipe it off on that piece of paper so it doesn't burn your finger. Once you have that nice and ready to go, remember we have this now, we're gonna have the header. Our header is not gonna go like this, but rather it's gonna go up. So our lines will be facing upward. And then we're gonna go ahead and glue here and here, so we can put them sandwiched together to get ourselves a header on top. I'm gonna go ahead and put this sandwich on top. Remember, our lines should be facing upward for the header. Glue one side, push it against the other side. Or you can glue one side at a time. It might be easier instead of what I just did. And hold it together until you get the top portion done. Now that we have it ready to go, what we're gonna do next, because our math, remember I talked in class that our math, the math translation for this portion is a little bit of an odd one. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna keep this last. Now that it's all nice and dry, instead of doing the math, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this combination square and we're gonna lay it against on top, and we're gonna go ahead and measure that. So if you take a close look at that, that is 1 1/16 inch. So our top jack stud and our top cripple stud will be 1 1/16 of an inch. So we're gonna go ahead and build how many? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're gonna go ahead and cut 5 pieces for that top portion. Same concept. Get yourself the ruler, a combination square, line it up. All we need is 1 1/16. 1 1/16 right there. Once we have that, let's draw our lines in and make our cutting. Now we have that, I'm gonna go ahead and do my first cut. And do the same, measure it just like anything else. Line it once, get the combination square, and draw your lines and cut it. Okay, so I just cut ourselves 2 top jack stud and 3 little cripple stud, and they're all the same size, 1 1/16 of an inch. I'm gonna go ahead and start gluing these pieces to the top before I put my top plate in as well. Go ahead and do the same thing and glue, same process. Get 2 pieces of glue to do the sandwich for the edge where our jack stud are at, top jack stud are at. Lay it perfectly straight, let it dry. And I'll do the same thing moving forward. We have now all the different parts for our window framing, all the parts on top. What you want to do is finish this up before you start with the top. I'm going to go ahead and skip this portion, let you go ahead and just move forward with that. Make sure you do these studs first before you put the top, the header, the top plate on. Remember to be very aware to make sure that the header is facing the right way. So you're going to go ahead and line this up to see if it's correct. If it is, go ahead and start gluing it in one at a time, upside down. If you flip it like this way, notice it will not fit perfectly and it's going off by a long shot. And that's what you don't want to do. So double check that your top plate is actually facing the correct side. So in this case, now I know it's correct side. I'm gonna put a little glue to the edge of this. And start with just one. Put that one in. Lay it perfectly straight, best you can, and hold it for about 10 seconds. Now we have one in. What we're gonna do is glue one at a time until you completely go through the whole process. You should be completing the whole model. And if you do have questions, feel free to email me.